What's good, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video, and this one I'm gonna break down what's going on with Tesla stock, what you should be watching for moving forward. I'm also gonna talk about what's going on with SPY, Nvidia, the QQQ, and many tickers out there, what the news is saying about Tesla that's very important, what's going on with all this data that just came out. But before I break anything down about all of this information, before I talk about what's going on with Tesla stock, I have to mention a couple of things before starting. Firstly, I am not a financial planner, so take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends very soon, so check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. Tesla was up 3.2% for the day, holding up quite nicely as I expected. I told you guys Tesla's going to likely try to break into the 290s very soon. That's what ended up happening to Tesla, as Tesla's gaining lots of relative strength. But the question is, how will Tesla continue to pump as we approach earnings, and how will Tesla move approaching it, right? Because right now, there's very mixed views about how Tesla's going to do for earnings, and it did affect how Tesla moved today, at least to some degree. But before I talk about all this data for Tesla, let's first talk about what's happening to the markets. So I want to remind everyone that we have some data dropping for tomorrow. Tomorrow, when the market opens, there's not a whole lot coming out. We do have retail sales data, but what's going to be more significant is the industrial production numbers. That may cause more volatility 15 minutes before the market opens. That's at 6:15 a.m. for me on the West Coast, or for people on the East Coast at 9:15 a.m., 15 minutes before the market opens. Lots of manufacturing numbers are coming out. This is very important for supply chains, which will affect inflation here in the USA. That's very important for like microeconomic perspectives. And on top of that, we have business inventories data coming out. Now, what's going to be more significant, however, is going to be the Fed speakers for tomorrow at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern time. We have Barr and Gibson from the Fed giving some speeches. They could cause more volatility, so just be prepared for that. Now, besides that, we don't really have too much data coming out for the remainder of the week because everything's going to be more fixated on earnings. And tomorrow, things are going to become more serious because we have Bank of America tomorrow before the market opens. Bank of America, Charles Schwab, Morgan Stanley, and PNC all releasing earnings. They're going to cause more volatility, so be ready for this. All right, so far, the banks have been doing quite well, beating the expectations which have been lowered, but that doesn't guarantee anything about their guidance and their outlooks for the future. Different banks could have different perspectives, so just be very prepared for this, and we will see how they do for tomorrow. This is going to cause more volatility, so just be ready for this. It could cause the market to either pop or drop in the pre-market, so expect some volatility by the time the market opens, and we will see what happens. But as big as tomorrow is going to be, it's not going to be as big as Wednesday because Wednesday will trump Tuesday because we have even bigger earnings. We have Goldman Sachs before the market opens. We have the NASDAQ and Ally Bank. Then after that, we have some big dogs. We have Tesla, we have Netflix, we have United, we have IBM, all announcing earnings after the market closes for Wednesday. I'm going to be watching Tesla specifically. Can't wait to hear what Elon Musk has to say. It is going to be massive for the company and for millions of investors out there. So be ready for that on Wednesday. We're getting even closer. When it comes to Tesla, however, there was some news that came out. It's basically looking at Tesla. There's this new thing that happened from the lawsuits. The Tesla board has to return $735 million in stock rewards to end what just happened with the lawsuit over the pay packages. This is worth noting. I don't think it's going to have a massive effect on Tesla because more eyes are on earnings and things like that, but it's just worth noting because this could affect how it moves, at least to some degree, maybe a little bit, and this is going to affect the compensations, of more and more individuals out there. So what basically happened was the board had to settle this case that was basically for the police and fire retirement system, which argued that the Tesla directors went overboard on the compensation awards for themselves starting in 2017. And this whole thing started to escalate as time went on. And eventually, we came to a settlement, which is basically causing a lot of the Tesla board members to have to pay once again for compensation. So it's worth noting. I mean, this is very, very important. Somewhat important, maybe not super important, but it is worth noting. So that did happen. There was also another piece of news that came out involving Elizabeth Warren. I did talk about this in more detail earlier. So if you want to see that, just watch my second video of the day. But basically, she's urging the SEC to investigate Tesla over the Twitter ties and the things that Elon Musk has said. I mean, once again, this could be very political. I'm not really picking any sides in this. I'm just going to try to be unbiased. But her saying this did cause Tesla to drop a little bit in the morning. You can see this came out very early, and that's the reason why Tesla started to cool off a little bit because the SEC potentially investigating Tesla is not very good news. Now, despite all of that, there was some negative news that also came out in the morning about Tesla's margins. Many analysts are saying that Tesla's going to do very well moving forward. They're very excited for the company. They think they're going to beat on EPS and revenue and all these things. But there's been some more negative talk about Tesla's margins, and they think that Tesla may have some very, very bad looking margins and it's not really sustainable. So, with all this talk coming out, this did negatively affect Tesla, at least to some degree today, but it didn't really matter that much because investors are still very hyped for earnings as Tesla's getting a lot more volume, and this is likely going to continue moving forward. Looking at the volume, we had about 130 million in volume. That's well, above where it used to be at the 120s and 90 million mark. That's a good sign for Tesla. We're seeing a lot more aggressive buying pressure than before. And to add on to this, there was some more improvements to the price pairs ratio. We're starting to see more and more buyers step in, and Tesla's continuing to outperform the market, which is more signs of relative strength even for today. Citigroup is remaining neutral on Tesla, which is fine, and Tesla tends to be green about 51% of the time on Tuesdays historically. Now, don't forget, July's tend to be relatively decent months for Tesla, not as strong as June's though. And so far for July, Tesla has been pumping for the most part. So the question is, will this go back to normal and will Tesla end up dropping again for like the second half? Could that happen after earnings? That's a real possibility to consider and to be prepared for. But at the same time, Tesla can also pump, so you never know with these earnings. Just be very prepared for that. During the second and fourth hours of the day, Tesla tends to see the most volatility. We tend to see the most green during the fourth hour. So be very careful and watch it during that time if you are interested in watching for more green. That's what typically we tend to see more green for Tesla. For the data affecting Tesla, we did see a slight increase in the short interest last Friday. So that was just a couple of days ago. The data is not out for today just yet, but we did see another increase, and we are starting to see more shorts piling in near the very end of the week. And also for this week as well, I'm anticipating it because we tend to see more shorts come in as we approach earnings in Tesla when it's like pumping. So the question is, how is Tesla going to do? I just want to talk about SPY real quick before I break down Tesla. For SPY, I'm seeing something like this playing out. Basically, it's looking like a head and shoulders is forming. We had this nice spike that formed on Friday, then a dump after that, and we formed another spike that's a little bit higher. So this is looking like we had a left shoulder forming possibly. A head could be forming. We could be on the verge of forming a right shoulder later on. But if the bank earnings are very strong, we might see the market form one more top, similar to what happened on Friday. We see how we like pumped in the morning, then we just came right back down. We could see something like this forming, a final top before a little bit more downside going into like Wednesday, then one more pop for the right shoulder before even more downside. I'm leaning more in this direction for as we approach like the next week for the market. I think it's going to be a very, very healthy pullback, not a crash or anything like that, because after we hit these lower levels, we could still bounce. I'm going to break down why I think this is very possible and how this may also affect Tesla. Now, to start us off, when it comes to SPY, let me first talk about this. We had a very, very interesting test, and I told you guys intraday, if we broke 451.36, we're going to see this thing approach 452, right? And that's what ended up happening. But if we rejected off of it, we could have had another head and shoulders that was like present intraday. What I'm seeing right now is this. Basically, when you zoom out, I think it's a little bit easier to see, right? We had this like potential left shoulder, the head forming. Could the head be done with? It's possible that high is already in, or we could be forming one more peak tomorrow depending on the bank earnings. I can't really predict that. That's very difficult to predict. But I do anticipate we're eventually going to come down to where our 50 EMA is on the 1 hour time frame, which I'm going to show you in a few minutes. And we might see the market cool off a little bit, get one more pop for the right shoulder, then eventually cool off a lot more because of some negative looking technicals. One of the things worth noting is we have a negative divergence on the 5-minute, on the 3-minute, and the 1-minute time frames. On the 1 hour time frame, the same thing is also going on right here on SPY. You could see we're seeing a divergence on the RSI. We're seeing it declining right over here as we're making this higher high. And on the 4 hour time frame, the same thing is happening on both the MACD and the RSI. You can see right here, the RSI showed a lower high. We're losing some strength despite seeing the market pumping the way it is, but there's no confirmation of us breaking down just yet. I just want to note that. So what this suggests is we're losing strength, and there's a possibility we're going to see the market cool off a bit, but it's not a guarantee until it actually happens. Now, what else can happen, and you have to remember this, is divergences don't always guarantee the exact top is in. So what if it pumps a little bit more? If that's the case and the RSI is still like at these lower levels, that would still suggest that it could eventually come down later on. So it just gives us confirmation, and there is downside likely going to happen in the future, but there's no confirmation that the downside is happening yet. That's what this is basically suggesting on the chart. I want to make that as clear as possible. So what does this mean for the market? Like I said before, I mean, the left shoulder could be in for SPY. This could be forming a head. Uh, Either the head is in and the high is in for the head, or it's going to try to like pop a little bit more to form the head off the bank earnings, then start to cool off a little bit. It's got to be one of those two. So then I'd be anticipating like another drop, one more bounce off this like I think it's on the 1 hour time from the 449 level, like around there. Maybe it comes down off this and then tries to bounce to from the right shoulder, or we pop one more time, then come down and bounce off 449. But then eventually, okay, if we do break below this 50 EMA below 448, later on, maybe going into like the later days of this week or even next week, then I see this thing eventually breaking down to 446 or lower to start filling these gaps down here. So I think eventually we are going to see the downside, but we need to be a little bit patient as we approach that. Also, for specific levels, if you're bullish, you want to see this thing break above 452. If it manages to do so, you're going to be watching 452.69 around that area because we saw a lot of rejections here historically. And if it breaks above this high, then we have the 453.5 area. If we break down, you're going to be watching 450 as support. If that fails us, there's 449.5, 449, and then 448.5. Those are some other important levels, but for now, we're just going to be watching this chart very carefully. I think personally that the high might be in and we might see, the market cool off after the bank earnings come out, maybe just a possibility. Not a guarantee, it's just something that I'm speculating because I don't know what's going to happen with the bank earnings. Either the top is in or we're going to make one more top and then see the downside. But just to be safe, just know what I'm basically eyeing would be that head and shoulders on SPY. For Tesla, however, I'm seeing something a little bit different. Tesla's gaining lots of relative strength and holding up quite nicely. I believe the trend is likely going to be continuing. It's going to be continuing basically where we get this like pop into the open, then we cool off a little bit over time, and then we get one more pop at the end of the day. I think Tesla's going to do something very similar. I think tomorrow we're going to see Tesla make an attempt to break 292. And if we break it, we're going to be watching 295 on Tesla. We might not break above it. We're probably going to reject off that and start cooling off as time goes on because of the market, just like how we did today, then make our way right back up and close somewhere in the green in the 290s once again. I think Tesla's going to attempt to try to hold above 290 for the majority of the day, and I'm still leaning more bullish. But one thing I want to note is that my target on Tesla has been in the 290s, around this 295 area, and we're very close to it. We're pretty close to it, if anything. And even if this is the case, I mean, it's very easy to be caught by euphoria and let this get the best of you. Remember, even if Tesla's pumping like this, approaching earnings, anything could happen after earnings. So be very careful when it comes to playing earnings or doing anything like that. So some specific levels to watch for would be if we break above 292 on Tesla, it's going to likely get very close to 295. This entire 292 zone of resistance, the high we made previously, the next important levels around this 295.4 area. If it rejects and breaks down, you're going to be watching 288.5 as support, then this 285 zone below that if it does end up breaking. And if that fails us, there's 282.84 and 280, which I don't really think Tesla's going to drop that low unless some very bad news happens, which I doubt. So my prediction would be maybe a pop around this 295 area for tomorrow, a bit of a cool off as time goes on, maybe a retracement to 290, maybe a little bit lower, then one more bounce, and Tesla's going to try to fight for like 292 by the end of the day and maybe close a little flat, maybe a little bit in the green once again. I think it's going to outperform the market. I'm still leaning more bullish approaching earnings, but then everything can change after earnings, so just be careful. For Apple, we've completed or come very close to completing this inverse head and shoulders on Apple, which is a very good sign for it. You can see it right about here. We had this inverse head and shoulder structure on Apple that developed, and overall it's holding up quite nicely. If we break above 194, you're going to be watching 196 or so, 195 then 196. If we break down, watch 193.5 then 192.5 as our supports. What do I think is going to happen? Well, it depends on the bank earnings. There is a chance that it could cool off a bit, but there's no confirmation yet. We are losing some momentum up here, but there's no confirmation just yet, so just be very careful. If anything, I'm going to be watching how it reacts to 194 for tomorrow. If it does break below 193.5, we could see somewhat of a drop. I do believe it's a little bit more likely it's going to happen, but just to be safe, we have to wait for confirmation. For the triple Q, in my opinion, it's very similar to the NASDAQ and also for SPY. We have a potential left shoulder that formed, a head has formed as well, and we're going to be watching for the right shoulder. I believe that with this negative divergence on the 1 hour, the 5 minute, the 3 minutes, and all these different time frames, we're going to likely see this thing retrace. I think the top could be in. We're going to be watching for a test of about 378 or so. Then maybe a bounce after that to form the right shoulder. Then we're eventually going to sink all the way down to like 373 to complete the head and shoulders, right? So maybe, a move like that. If the high is not in, it could pop a little bit higher to like 385 and then reject, then start coming down to the level I just mentioned before forming that formation. So there's a potential head and shoulders forming. Keep this in your mind for the triple Q. If we break above 383.5, watch 384, then 385. If we break below 382, this is our support right now. If we break below this, watch this thing come all the way down to this 381 area, then 380, 379, 378.5, and etc. What do I think is more likely? Well, I think a head and shoulders is forming, so the market could hold up for some more time, right? Kind of like range trade to form these structures, but then eventually sell off later on. For Nvidia, this thing is holding up quite decently. In my opinion, we could see this thing try to hold up for the time being as we got some bullish news about more price upgrades. But here's my view of Nvidia. The market's going to likely sell off soon, so this may cause Nvidia to retest 455 or so, maybe even 450. If that breaks, 442 could come for the stock. But for now, I don't really care where Nvidia is. Whether it's 450, 442 is the low, or if it's like 440, 455, wherever it is. It does not matter because I think approaching August, we're going to see Nvidia in the 500s. I think it's going to go for 500. I think there's a very good chance investors are very, very, very fixated on that strike before earnings. I think there's a good chance they're going to try to pump it, approaching it for another squeeze, approaching earnings. Just like how Tesla's pumping, approaching earnings, I think Nvidia is going to do the same thing next. Now, what do I think is going to happen for tomorrow specifically? It may cool off and retest 455 and try to bounce and trade a little sideways. But overall, it really goes based off like what happens with the bank earnings. For Microsoft, it's been pretty stuck in this range. So I'm going to be watching, could this thing get above 348? If it manages to do so, it could push for 350. For support, watch 343.88. If that fails us, then there's 341. I'm in the middle as this thing is very tight, so we're going to be watching this very carefully. And I think it's just going to range trade for the time being. It may, react to how the banks are looking for now, and I'm just anticipating some sideways price action for it. AMD is looking a little bullish. It may cool off a little bit to retest 116 and try to bounce, but what's good is we have these imbalances around this 125 area. If it breaks above 120, we could see it pump a little bit more. For Netflix, we might see it drop a little bit, just a tiny bit to retest like 445 or so, then try to bounce. But I do believe it's going to try to hold up approaching the big earnings report. There's a possible inverse head and shoulders forming, so maybe it drops to retest, where this right shoulder is because of the market, and then it could try pumping to 460 plus approaching earnings one more time. So I do think it's going to pump approaching earnings. I think it's going to be very similar to Tesla trying to hold up and outperform the markets, but first, it may cool off just a tiny bit because of this inverse head and shoulder structure, and also because of how the market may dictate it for tomorrow. And then it may continue to hold up and approach those high levels. For Coinbase, I think this is very flat right now. It's just range trading between 101 and 110, and it's getting tighter and tighter as time goes on. So we're going to be watching it for a big break. If it gets good news and breaks above 110, we're going to be watching 114 and 116 and 120. If it breaks down, you're going to be watching 104 as support, 102.5, 101.3, then 100, and finally 97.5. What do I think is more likely? Well, I think that because of the market, we might see it cool off and retest 101, then try to bounce off that. And I think it's just going to be stuck in this range for an extended period of time. It's going to trade sideways for a little bit longer before it picks a direction. If it does end up breaking below 97.5, however, or at least 100, it's going to come down to a 97.5, then even lower levels. But just be patient with it just to be safe. Now, when we have Amazon, Amazon's looking a little bit weak. I think it's going to test the 50. If it breaks below it, watch 32.6 and 31. If you're bullish, watch 134.7. I think I said 34. I'm sorry about that. 134.7. And then if it breaks above that, you're going to be watching 135 and 136. What do I think is more likely? I think it's just going to trade a little sideways, maybe to decline a little bit, maybe retest 133. And we might see it come to the lower 130s, just looking at this trend, which is looking more bearish as we have a potential head and shoulder structure. And it's looking a little bit weak. It's looking more distributive in my eyes. For Meta, it has a tendency of testing that 4-hour 50 EMA. So there's a good chance it's going to do this again. We may see it come down to 300, but before that happens, it could try to bounce and retest 312 and then come down. But I still think it's looking a little weak on the 4-hour time frame. So it might come down to 300 and try to bounce. Or it may be a little higher because the 50 may be trending up by the time we get to that tomorrow or beyond. So maybe around 303 or so. It may drop a little bit lower and then try to bounce and get a retest of this 4-hour 50 EMA because it's been doing this many times for the past few months. It keeps on bouncing off the 50 and there's a good chance it's going to happen again. All right, so that's what I'm seeing for it. For Google, I'm just seeing very sideways price action. I mean, the bulls want to see it break 127 and then get up to like 130. The bears want to see it break below 125 and make its way down to 123. I think it's going to come down to 123. The 4 hours looking a little bit more bearish. So I'm going to be watching 123 on Google if it does break below 125. Right. So, anyways, with the market, there are some stocks looking like they may underperform, but Tesla is a big exception. I think Tesla has a good potential to get a nice pop in the morning, cool off as time goes on, and then once again, kind of just remain range bound in the 290s and try to hold up as time goes on, as Tesla has some nice strength, and the structure is still looking more bullish than bearish. So I'm going to be watching this. If it somehow breaks 295, which I'm not really counting on that, but if it does somehow do that, you're going to be watching 297.5 and potentially 300 after that if it manages to get a very strong break above that. But for now, we're just going to be watching 295 to see if Tesla could get all the way up there. But first, it has to break the high of the day from today, around 292.23. I think it's eventually going to break this, but just to be safe, watch for confirmation. And don't forget about the news coming out for tomorrow. This is what I'm predicting. Don't forget the news can affect it intraday, so my predictions may not always be perfect, but I do the best I can based off the current trend. And as you guys can tell, my predictions are sometimes or oftentimes correct. As I was predicting Tesla would pump approaching earnings, and so far that's what Tesla has done. I'm a human. I make mistakes. I want to make that clear. Do not solely trade based off what I say. Just use it as a guide for reference. And with that said, I want the best for all of you. Okay? Tesla to the moon alongside the whole market as the long term is still incredibly bright. And peace out.